Hey, welcome to Starbound. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories. That's including Sunspire Academy and Frarian and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support our new episodes and series, tap join below and become a Starbound member today. Now, let's get into today's story. The Galactic Constitution consisted of a set of simple rules, originally conceived by the most powerful AI ever created. It included peacekeeping directives across multiple species, such as never rubbing liver flowers on the skin of a Kradax, or never seating Viserians and Troziers anywhere near each other during diplomatic meetings. These rules were not always straightforward and were often difficult for an organic mind to comprehend. But not all of them were cryptic. The oldest rule on the list was clear enough. Do not mess with humans. A rule that, had he known it, might have prevented Emor from hiding in this abandoned warehouse on IMK-7. The place reeked of rust and decay, with its metallic walls groaning under the weight of centuries as Emor pressed himself against the cold surface, his antenna moving nervously as he inched toward the covered window. Outside, he could capture the vibration of anti-grav engines and the mechanical whir of law enforcement drones. His biggest worry, or so he thought, was that the authorities had surrounded the warehouse, preventing their escape to the ship waiting in the nearby docking bay. In the center of the room, 4 humans sat bound to chairs arranged in a tight circle. The father, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair, kept his jaw clenched as he stared at his captors with defiant eyes. Beside him, his wife trembled, her gaze darting between her 2 children, a boy of perhaps 12 and a girl who couldn't have been older than 8. Thick polymer restraints bit into their wrists and ankles, and industrial tape covered their mouths. The little girl's eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks as she struggled to breathe through her nose. Emor reached the window and carefully lifted a corner of the makeshift covering, a sheet of corrugated metal they had hastily welded in place. What he saw made his yellow skin pale to a sickly shade. The trading planet's perpetual twilight was broken by the harsh glare of searchlights. Law enforcement vessels hovered at strategic positions around the warehouse, their sleek hulls bristling with weapon systems. The ships were standard severe patrol craft, their design favoring function over form, angular, predatory shapes that reminded Emor of the reptilian species that piloted them. From the cargo bays of the larger vessels, streams of drones poured out like metallic insects, their sensors sweeping the building with invisible beams that made Emor's antenna tingle uncomfortably. But it was the ground forces that made his elongated skull throb with anxiety. Dozens of Seviers in full combat armor had taken up positions behind makeshift barriers. Their reptilian forms were enhanced by the powered exoskeletons they wore, making them appear even more imposing than their natural 2.5-meter height. Their scales, naturally a molted green-brown, were hidden beneath layers of reactive armor that shifted color to match their surroundings. Long, muscular tails helped them balance their weight of their heavy pulse rifles, and their narrow, predatory eyes glowed as they stared at the warehouse, a sign they were using thermal vision. It's not looking good, Emor said, pulling away from the window. Those lizards have us completely surrounded. Brior stood near the hostages, a laser rifle pressed against the father's temple. Like Emor, he was Hazarian, bipedal and humanoid in basic structure, but with distinct features that set their species apart. His yellow skin and a slight luminescent quality in the warehouse's green emergency lighting, and his 2 antennae drooped backward along with his elongated skull. The skull itself was their most distinctive feature, extended back nearly twice the length of a human's, giving the impression of exceptional intelligence. In reality, most of that cranial space was filled with cerebrospinal fluid that helped regulate their body temperature and protect their relatively small-sized brains from blunt impact. "We use them as shields," Brior said, gesturing at the hostages with his rifle. The weapon hot with energy, its power cell glowing an ominous red. "We march out there with guns to their heads, get to our ships, and leave this cesspool behind."
"You're a fool!"
Grixo spat from across the room. The third member of their group was pacing near a stack of stolen crates, his antenna rigid, showing his agitation. Where Brior was stocky and aggressive, Grixo was lean and calculating, his elongated fingers constantly moving as if manipulating invisible strings.
"Those drones would take us out the moment we stepped out of the warehouse. They don't care about collateral damage when it comes to protecting their precious trade routes."
Grixo stopped pacing and fixed Brior with a contemptuous stare.
"We need to negotiate. We poison the hostages. Something slow-acting but lethal. Then we tell the lizards that only we have the cure. They'll have no choice but to let us return to our planet."
"Poison?" Brior's voice rose an octave, his grip on the rifle tightening. "And where exactly do we get this magical poison? Do you pack some in your utility belt between the stolen tech and your delusions of grandeur?"
"There are chemicals in the warehouse,"
Grixo replied smoothly.
"Industrial solvents, coolants. With the right combination, I could synthesize something suitable. The Seviers won't risk human lives. The diplomatic incident alone would..."
"Would what?" Brior interrupted. "Make them angry. They're already angry. We're surrounded by enough firepower to vaporize this entire district." Emor watched the argument escalate, his antenna drooping with exhaustion. They'd been trapped here for 6 hours now, ever since the job went sideways. It was supposed to be simple: break into the Tech Consortium's warehouse, steal the data storage unit, and disappear into the crowded markets of IMK-7 before anyone noticed. But someone had triggered an alarm, and worse, they'd grabbed the first available hostages to ensure their escape. A human family who had been touring the streets.
"Listen to yourselves,"
Grixo continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made Emor's teeth ache.
"Our government will protect us the moment we cross into Hazarian space. That's what we do. But we have to get there alive first."
"Which is why we move now!" Brior shouted, causing the human children to flinch. "Before more lizards show up, before they bring in heavy artillery. We have 4 human shields. That's our ticket out of here."
"Your ticket will get us killed before we reach the ship,"
Grixo countered.
"Those drones are programmed for precision strikes. They'll disable us without harming the humans. Then we'll be at the mercy of the Seviers, and you know how much they enjoy their interrogation methods."
"So your plan is to what? Sit here and wait for them to get bored?" Brior's yellow skin flushed darker with anger. "Negotiate with species that see us as nothing more than thieves and kidnappers?"
"We are thieves and kidnappers,"
Grixo pointed out with infuriating calm.
"But we're also Hazarian citizens. Our people won't abandon us. We just need to buy time for Diplomatic Corps to intervene."
"The Diplomatic Corps?" Brior laughed bitterly. "You think they're going to stick their necks out for 3 criminals who botched a simple theft?"
"They will if the alternative is harmful to our pride as Death Worlders,"
Grixo said.
"The videos alone would spark protest across the homeworld. No, they'll negotiate our release, probably in exchange for some trade concessions. All we have to do is survive until then."
"Survive," Brior repeated mockingly. "Brilliant plan, Grixo. Truly inspired."
"Better than your suicide charge," Grixo shot back. "At least with negotiation, we have a chance. Your way guarantees death." Enough! Emor screamed, his antenna vibrating with the intensity of his emotion. Both Hazarians turned to stare at him, surprised by the outburst from their usually quiet companion. This job is a failure. We should consider turning ourselves in before— Give up! Brior's face contorted with rage. He swung the rifle away from the hostages and pointed it at Emor. Are you insane? After everything we've risked? Put the gun down, Brior, Emor said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're not getting out of this. Not with the entire severe security force outside. Maybe if we surrender now, show cooperation. That's stupid! Brior's finger moved to the trigger. You could just eliminate one of them to show them we're not playing games! The human's father's eyes widened above his gag, and he began struggling against his restraints. His wife made muffled sounds of protest, while the children started crying harder. You're not thinking clearly, Emor said, moving slowly toward Brior. Put the gun down. We need to figure out— No! I'm tired of thinking! Tired of planning! Tired of— Emor lunged forward, grabbing for the rifle. Brior tried to pull back, but Emor's desperation gave him strength. They wrestled for control of the weapon, their antennae tangling as they grappled. Stop it, both of you! Grixo rushed over, trying to separate them. This isn't helping! Emor managed to wrench the rifle away, shoving Brior backward. The stocky Hazarian stumbled, catching himself against a crate. Calm down, Grixo said, placing a hand on Brior's shoulder. We're all stressed, but fighting among ourselves won't— The window exploded. Glass and metal fragments sprayed across the warehouse as drone burst through, its sleek form hovering menacingly in the air. Emor dove behind the hostages, using their bound forms as cover. Brior and Grixo scrambled for protection under the crates. The drone didn't fire. Instead, it dropped a small sphere onto the floor. The device rolled to a stop in the center of the room, equidistant from the hostages and the Hazarians' hiding spots. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the sphere began to glow, projecting the hologram of a severe in dress uniform. Greetings, the hologram said, its voice cultured despite the sibilant accent of its species. I am Galactic Agent Z. I want you to know that I am your friend. My goal is to avoid a tragedy and ensure that the least amount of lives possible are lost today. Emor peered out from behind the hostages, studying the projection. Agent Z appeared to be middle-aged for severe, his scales showing the darker coloration that came with maturity. His uniform bore numerous commendations, and his bearing suggested long experience in negotiation. We're listening, Emor called out, trying to keep his voice steady. Excellent, Z replied, his reptilian features attempting what might have been a smile. I believe we can resolve this situation to everyone's benefit. You release the hostages, and I guarantee you a quick, painless death. Emor blinked, certain he had misheard. What? A quick death, Z repeated pleasantly. Nerve gas, perhaps, or a precision shot to the brainstem. You won't feel a thing. That's your offer. Emor couldn't hide his disbelief. We release the hostages, and you kill us. Quickly, Z emphasized, as if this was an important selling point. No suffering, no prolonged interrogation, just a peaceful end. You're insane! Brior shouted from behind the crates. What kind of negotiation is this? The best you're going to get, Z replied, his tone remaining frustratingly calm. I'm being quite generous, actually. The alternative is significantly less pleasant. We want safe passage to our ship, Emor said, trying to take control of the conversation. We'll release the hostages once we're in orbit. No, Z interrupted. That's not an option. Then we want guarantees of fair treatment, access to legal representation. Also, no.
A reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation? No. Emor felt his antenna beginning to twitch with frustration. Then what exactly are you offering besides death? Quick death, Z corrected. I feel the distinction is important.
This is ridiculous,
Grixo called out.
You're supposed to be a negotiator! Negotiate!
I am negotiating, Z replied. I'm offering you mercy. Do you have any idea how generous that is under the circumstances? Mercy. Emor stood up partially, forgetting his cover in his anger. You call execution mercy. Compared to the alternative? Absolutely. What alternative? Emor demanded. What could possibly be worse than death? Z's holographic form leaned forward, and for the first time, his professional mask slipped. A slow death. A very, very slow death. You're threatening us now. Brior emerged from behind the crates, his fist clenched. So much for being our friend. I'm not threatening you, Z said, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. I'm trying to save you from something far worse than anything my people could devise. Worse than severe interrogation? Grixo asked skeptically. I doubt that. Z's image flickered, and suddenly his composure cracked completely.
Do you have any idea what you've done? Any concept of the catastrophe you've brought to my world?
We stole some tech and grabbed some hostages, Emor said defensively. It's not like we—
Forget your first crime! You grabbed human hostages!
Z roared, making all three Hizarians flinch.
Do you know what the first and oldest law in the Galactic Constitution states? Do you?
Something about stealing, Brior muttered.
Do not mess with humans!
Z quoted.
Not try to avoid conflict with humans, not to be cautious around humans. Do not mess with humans!
His image paced back and forth, tail lashing.
And it's written that way for a reason!
Look, we'll let them go, Emor said quickly. No harm done. We can—
No harm done.
Z laughed, but there was no humor in it.
You think no harm done matters to them? You think they care about your intentions or your mercy?
He shook his head.
I'm doing you a favor by offering you a quick death. If you prefer, I can keep you alive instead. Alive is good,
Grixo said quickly. We prefer alive.
Do you?
Z's smile was all teeth.
Very well. I promise that my species will not harm you. We'll keep you safe and comfortable until the humans come for you.
He paused, letting that sink in.
Of course, I can't speak for what happens after that.
The communication ended abruptly, the hologram disappearing and leaving only the softly glow sphere behind. The drone remained hovering in the broken window, its sensors fixed on them. Emor stared at where the projection had been, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't how negotiations were supposed to go. Where were the demands, the counteroffers, the gradual working toward a compromise? What the hell was that about? Brior asked, voicing what they all were thinking. I don't know, Emor admitted. He pulled out his datapad, suddenly needing to understand what was happening beyond these walls. Let me check the news feeds. The datapad's screen flickered to life, automatically connecting to the local network. Emor navigated to the Galactic News Consortium's main feed, expecting to see their pictures and a standard report about the hostage situation. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The usual news anchors, a pair of Zalathi whose blue, translucent skin typically gave them an aura of serene professionalism, looked haggard. Their bioluminescent patches, which normally pulsed in calm patterns, were flashing erratically.
They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their 4 eyes darting nervously as they delivered the report. Confirmed. 3 members of the Hazarian species have taken human civilians hostage on IMK-7, the lead anchor was saying. We advise all citizens to pray for the Hazarian people during this unprecedented crisis. Pray for our people? Grixo had moved closer to look over Emor's shoulder. Not pray for us? The second anchor continued. Sources indicate that the perpetrators are demanding to reach Hazarian space, where the government would protect them from following their culture. This has created what diplomatic experts are calling a catastrophic scenario for Hazarian human relations. The Hazarian ambassador has released a statement distancing their government from the actions of these individuals, the first anchor added. However, analysts suggest this may not be sufficient to prevent. The Zalathi paused, all 4 eyes closing briefly. To prevent a formal human response. A formal response? Brior had joined them now, all 3 Hazarians clustered around the small screen. What does that mean? The newsfeed cut to archival footage, images Emor had seen in history classes but never thought he'd see in a current events context. Worlds burning, fleets of ships so vast they blotted out stars, cities reduced to molecular dust, and through it all, the calm, measured movements of human forces, methodical in their destruction. For those viewers too young to remember, the anchor's voice continued over the footage. The last species to significantly harm human civilians was the Krex Confederacy. They no longer exist. That was different, Grixo said quickly. The Krek killed thousands. We've just detained 4. The Moteki Empire kidnapped 6 human children for their research programs, the second anchor said, as if responding to Grixo's comment. The Empire fell within 3 months. Only scattered Moteki colonies remain, living under human supervision. But we haven't hurt them, Emor protested to the screen. They're alive, unharmed. The feed switched to a panel of experts, all looking grave. A green military analyst was speaking. The concern isn't just about these 4 hostages. It's about the precedent. If the Hazarians successfully use human civilians as bargaining chips and escape consequences by reaching their home space, it sends a message to every criminal organization in the galaxy. A message the humans will not allow, agreed a Vorthan economist, her transparent form chiming with anxiety. The entire stability of galactic commerce depends on the inviolability of human civilians. They're the only species trusted by all others, the only ones who can serve as neutral arbitrators and guarantors. Because everyone knows why the first law exists, the severe analyst added grimly. Emor's hands were shaking as he held the datapad. This couldn't be happening. They were small-time criminals, not terrorists or warlords. They'd stolen some tech, grabbed some hostages in a panic. It was supposed to be a setback, not a... We might have just started a war, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't be dramatic, Brior said, but his yellow skin had paled to almost white. It's 4 humans. Surely they wouldn't... Wouldn't what? Grixo interrupted. Wouldn't respond? Wouldn't retaliate? Did you not see those images? The Krek Confederacy controlled quite a few systems. 6! And the humans reduced them to ash because they attacked a single colony ship. But that was military action, Brior argued desperately. We're just criminals who took their children and expect to be protected when we return home, Grixo finished. Which might actually be worse. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation finally settling on them. Outside, the drone continued to hover, patient and watchful. The hostages remained bound to their chairs, the adults watching their captors with a mixture of fear and something else. Pity, perhaps? We need information, Emor said finally. Real information, not news speculation. He looked at the hostages. Maybe they know how their people handle these situations.
You want to ask them?
Brior said incredulously.
Ask the hostages for advice.
Do you have a better idea? Emor shot back. Because I'm open to suggestions. Brior had no response to that. None of them did.
Which one?
Grixo asked, studying the bound humans.
The adults might lie to us.
The boy looks angry,
Brior observed. Indeed, the adolescent was glaring at them with undisguised hatred.
He won't cooperate.
The little girl, then, Emor decided. She's young enough to tell the truth, too scared to lie. They approached the hostages slowly, as if the humans might somehow attack despite their restraints. The father made muffled protest as they neared his daughter, struggling against his bonds. The mother's eyes pleaded with them over the gag. We're not going to hurt her, Emor said, trying to sound reassuring. We just need to ask her something. He knelt in front of the little girl, whose tear-stained face looked up at him with wide eyes. Carefully, he peeled the tape from her mouth, trying to be gentle. The girl gasped, drawing in deep breaths.
Mommy!
She cried immediately.
Shh, it's okay,
Emor said, though he knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. I need to ask you a question. Can you understand me? The girl stared at him blankly, her mouth refusing to move.
She might not have a translator implant,
Grixo suggested.
She's very young.
Do you have a translator? Emor asked slowly, over-enunciating. Can you understand my words? The girl tilted her head, then nodded slightly. Good, Emor said, relief flooding through him. I need to know. How do humans handle situations like this? When someone takes hostages, what do your people do? The girl looked confused, her small face scrunching up. She glanced at her parents, then back at Emor. Please, Emor said, desperation creeping into his voice. It's important. How do humans respond when someone takes their people? What do they do? The little girl was quiet for a long moment, contemplative. Then, with the matter-of-fact tone only a child could manage, she pointed at the datapad still clutched in Emor's hand. Planet goes boom, she said simply. The warehouse fell silent, except for the constant noise of the hovering drone. Emor stared at the little girl, his elongated skull throbbing with a sudden, terrible headache. Planet goes, he started to repeat, but couldn't finish. The girl nodded solemnly, as if confirming a fundamental truth of the universe, which Emor realized with growing horror might be exactly what it was. Outside, more engines could be heard approaching. The siege was intensifying, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, Emor was certain, humanity had already taken notice of what 3 foolish Hazarians had done on a backwater trading world. The datapad slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the floor. On its screen, the news continued to scroll, each update more dire than the last. They had broken the oldest rule in the galaxy, and now they would learn why it existed. The datapad lay on the floor like a venomous creature, its screen still glowing with updates that Emor couldn't bring himself to read. His legs felt like they'd been filled with liquid metal, heavy and unresponsive. The little girl's words echoed in his skull. Planet goes boom. Planet goes boom. For what felt like an eternity, none of them moved. The drone continued its patient hovering. The hostages remained bound, and the 3 Hazarians stood frozen in a tableau of dawning horror. Finally, Emor's body obeyed his commands. His hand trembled as he reached for the datapad, each centimeter of movement requiring enormous effort. His fingers closed around the device, and he slowly raised it to eye level. Without a word, Brior and Grixo moved to flank him, their earlier animosity forgotten in the face of something far worse than capture or death. The newsfeed
had changed. The animated discussion between experts had been replaced by a single, static image that made Emor's antenna go rigid with shock. Their home world hung in space. The familiar yellow-green continents and blue oceans instantly recognizable. But spreading across the northern hemisphere like a cancer was a bloom of fire. Nuclear fire, expanding in real time as they watched. Cities that had stood for millennia were vaporized in seconds. Forests that had taken centuries to grow became ash in heartbeats. The planetary defense grid, their pride and joy, flickered and died like candles in a hurricane. The news anchors said nothing. The Zolothi pair simply stared at their monitors, their expressions frozen. One of them had all four eyes closed, while the other watched with the fascination of someone witnessing the impossible made real.
That's not real.
Brior whispered, his voice cracking.
It's propaganda. Special effects. They're trying to scare us. And
Look at the timestamp.
Grixo interrupted, his finger pointing at the corner of the screen with mechanical precision.
This is a live feed from the Galactic Monitoring Station. Those are encrypted signals. They can't be faked.
Half the planet? Emor breathed, the words barely audible. Half our world is gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Each of them stared at the screen, watching their civilization burn, unable to process the magnitude of what they were seeing. Millions of their people, friends, family, strangers who had never heard of three criminals named Emor, Brior, and Grixo, were dying because of what they'd done in this warehouse. We caused this, Emor thought, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. We drew humanity's attention to our world, to our culture of self-protection, our tradition of shielding our criminals from outside justice. We showed them that Hyzarians would protect even kidnappers if they made it home. The chain of events unfolded in his mind with horrible clarity. Their government, bound by ancient traditions and recent laws, would have protected them once they reached Hyzarian space. The humans would have demanded their extradition. The government would have refused, citing sovereignty and cultural practices. And then it would be the same. Planet goes boom. They hadn't just doomed themselves. They had triggered a cascade that showed the galaxy why that old law existed, that would serve as a reminder to every species, every government, every individual of why that first rule existed. They'd become an example, a cautionary tale that would be told for generations. Movement from the hostages drew his attention. The father was looking at them with an expression that made Emor's stomach turn. It wasn't fear or anger anymore. It was pity, raw, genuine pity for the three beings who had just watched their world begin to die. The sphere in the center of the room flickered back to life. Agent Z's image reappeared, but his earlier composure was completely gone. His scales had paled to an unhealthy gray, and his tail twitched with nervous energy.
A human wishes to speak with you,
he said without preamble. The image shifted before they could respond. Where the severe negotiator had stood, a human now appeared, male, middle-aged, wearing a military uniform devoid of any decorations or rank insignia. His face was utterly expressionless, as if carved from stone. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain his position or authority. He simply looked at them with eyes that held no emotion whatsoever and spoke in a voice as flat as processed steel. Half your world is gone. You have 10 minutes to release the hostages unharmed, or the other half will be gone too. The transmission ended. No additional threats.
No elaborate explanations, no negotiation. Just a statement of fact delivered with the casual certainty of someone describing the weather. Emor's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, the datapad clattering beside him. Brior made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. It was impossible to tell. Grixo stood perfectly still, his brilliant mind finally encountering a problem with no solution. They couldn't speak. What words could possibly matter when half your species had just been erased? When the other half hung by a thread as thin as the patience of the beings they'd wronged? Emor looked at Brior and then at Grixo. In their eyes, he saw his own thoughts reflected. The crushing weight of defeat, the knowledge that they'd already lost everything that mattered. Their freedom, their world, their future. All gone because they'd broken a rule they dismissed as human arrogance. They needed to respond, to beg, to plead, to do something. But when Emor turned back to the sphere, the human was gone. Agent Z had returned, looking like he had aged a decade in the past minute.
Humanity has half your species as hostage,
the Severe said, his professional tone a mockery of the situation.
You can't forget your plan to return to your planet. There's nowhere to return to. The human fleet has blockaded the system. Nothing gets in or out without their permission.
The quick death, Brior said suddenly, his voice hollow. Is that still... Can we still...
Too late for that mercy, Z replied. However, humanity has agreed to a compromise. If you release the hostages unharmed, they'll allow the Galactic Authority to handle your punishment. You'll spend the rest of your lives in comfortable confinement. You'll be fed, housed, given entertainment and education. You'll live.
The unspoken addition hung in the air. You'll live knowing what you've done. None of them knew what to say. What response could possibly suffice? Thank you for not killing the rest of our species. The words turned to ash before they could be spoken. The seconds ticked by. Somewhere in the distance, Emor could hear more engines approaching. The siege was tightening, though it hardly mattered now. They already lost everything worth fighting for. 8 minutes left. 7, 6. We have to let them go, Emor said finally, his voice faint.
I know,
Brior replied. All his earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell.
The restraints,
Grixo said mechanically.
We need to cut the restraints.
They moved like automatons, pulling out tools, cutting through the polymer bonds. The humans remained still, perhaps sensing that any sudden movement might shatter what little control their captors had left. The father was freed first, then the mother, then the boy. Finally, Emor knelt before the little girl whose prophecy had proven so terribly accurate. I'm sorry, he whispered as he cut her bonds, though he knew the words were meaningless. The family stood slowly, uncertainly. The father gathered his wife and children close, then looked at the 3 Hazarians. For a moment, Emor thought he might speak, might offer some word of condemnation or forgiveness, but he simply nodded once and led his family toward the door. They walked past the hovering drone, through the blasted window frame, and out into the waiting arms of the severe forces, safe, alive, going home to a world that still existed, to families that still lived, to a future that still held possibility.
Emor, Brior, and Grixo stood in the empty warehouse, surrounded by stolen goods that no longer mattered in dreams that had turned to nightmares. They'd learned about more than just the existence of galactic law warned about humans. They'd learned why it existed, written in nuclear fire across the face of their dying world. And they would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of their lives. The sphere flickered one last time. Agent Z's voice was almost gentle now.
The Galactic Authority transport is on its way. Don't resist. It's over.
Emor sank to the floor, his elongated skull throbbing with the weight of understanding. They'd broken the oldest rule in the galaxy, and half a world had paid the price for their education. Outside, the siege was ending. But for 3 Hazarians who had thought themselves clever, the real imprisonment was just beginning. The prison of memory, of guilt, of knowing that somewhere among the stars, a little human girl had spoken the truth with the innocent certainty of a child. Planet goes boom. And it had.